All right, so our cultural limitations, the next section here. He says in chapter 7, which he's going to get to in a few chapters later, he's going to include some severe majority world critiques of traditional Western anti-supernaturalists, right? But here he wants to simply introduce the question of the cultural limitations of some of our philosophic presuppositions. Assumptions about reality are often culturally formed, and events that function as reality, right, by the criteria of one culture can shape its history, even if these assumptions are foreign to another culture. He tells us that the noted historian of Greco-Roman antiquity, Ramses MacMullen, warns that history proper does not pass judgment on whether ancients believed rightly or wrongly about their miracle claims. History proper simply describes those beliefs. And so, in the wake of post-modernity in the West, the collapse of traditional Western paradigms has led to the reevaluation of a number of long-held interpretations of reality. And so, again, how we view things is based on our worldview, our paradigms, our assumptions. And so he wants us to say we need to be careful and examine those carefully.
Yeah, let's take example, the antebellum South in America before the Civil War. If you're a historian of modern day, you might not like reading accounts of slaves who actually enjoy their slavery or who enjoy the type of subjugation that they're under. And so if you don't enjoy that and you don't write about it and those accounts just pass into the wind, well, are you doing history or are you curtailing history by kind of only reporting what you want to be out there? You want the inflammatory, you want those that rose up against their masters to slay them and move to a different island? Or is your job as a historian to just view those as stories of a particular person that you should account for in your accounting of what happened? And so I think that tends to be the case where we're no longer being historians there, and we're being more modern day reporters, and we're in the editorial column, which seems to be all of it these days. All right, so have we privileged a particular Western worldview is the question that he's wanting to posit here. Well, some New Testament scholars have already challenged the traditional critical approach as prejudiced on this point, sometimes by drawing insights from other disciplines or cultures. We talk about the courtroom scene as a big one there, and apply it to a lot of our argumentation. Charles Talbert notes that some scholars, like Gerard Ludemann, rules out any historical core miracle stories because miracles are assumed not to happen. By contrast to such approaches, some writers question whether a priori dismissals of all claims for evidence of supernatural activity is a genuinely open-minded, objective approach. So just because you should dismiss them, whether or not you should actually view them as important to the story. One of those things could be, a particular need for rain prayed about and it rains. Well, if you dismiss that as a miracle claim and don't write about it, why not view that as just a normal happenstance of coincidence? And so by not including it and dismissing it completely as a miracle claim, not including it, you're doing a disservice to the story of history there. So as Talbert notes, the question as to whether miracles are possible reflects the understanding of possibility in one's worldview, and worldviews are highly resistant to disconfirmation, right? Those are our basic belief systems. It's the glasses on the edge of our nose that we peer at the world through, and to try and knock those glasses off is very, very hard because we need them to see. We don't want to take them off. So if we understand, if it hits our worldview too quickly, we need to realize that we are instantly grabbing for our glasses, and we don't want to change them out too often, because that's just not how humans work.
Yeah. And so it says the materialistic worldview represented by Ludemann dictates that the world was and is ruled by iron physical laws that not even God can or could bend. He says this, however, a worldview, right? This is a worldview and not an argument, right? Okay, that's fine. That's what you believe. That's your worldview, but that's not an argument, Scholars, he says, differ in their evaluations of what is possible, evaluations that in turn shape how they evaluate the historical reliability of claims in documents like Acts and the Gospels. And so he says, one philosopher warns that those who dismiss miracles yet are unwilling to offer solid arguments, need to admit that they have a faith commitment which precludes the possibility of miracles. And so, all right, so I don't like miracles. I don't believe they happen because I don't believe they happen because I don't believe they can happen. Well, all right, this one philosopher is suggesting that's kind of a faith commitment, and it's not really an argument. I don't believe it happened because I don't believe it can happen. Why not?
And we have to remember, too, that we're doing history, not science. So we're not able to reproduce the pattern of praying for rain at this particular moment in time and then it rains. We can't rewind the clock and do it again and see if we get a different result or the same result. We're accounting for the accountment of history. Our current understanding of ordinary does not comprehensively describe reality. And before we dismiss all possibility of suprahuman intervention, we are obligated to make explicit and evaluate the presuppositions on which a wholesale dismissal would be based. If we take into account the historically conditioned presuppositions favored in antiquity, we must also consider those of modern academia. So if we can easily dismiss the ones that happened then as being wrong because we're right, well, how about somebody in the future looking back at ours and dismissing them because theirs is right? So shouldn't we dismiss ours automatically, right?
Or at least examine them.
Right, or at least examine them. Exactly. So we typically ground our critique of supernatural phenomenon in a modern Western worldview that we do not question. And then we use those untested assumptions to posit an authoritative meta-narrative or construal of reality. Now, some critics may thus immediately dismiss out of hand challenges to examine their worldview, and hence may also dismiss the secondary argument in the book. But he suspects that many of these critics do so on the basis of historically conditioned a prioris that have been never seriously examined and that some hold inflexibility.
All right, so that's kind of part of his main claim here, at least in this section. He tells us the New Testament scholar Walter Wink claims that historical research depends on analogy, and so to evaluate the plausibility of accounts about the past, but warns that our limited experiences can unfairly constrict the analogies with which we work, right? So, my experience tells me that these types of things happen, and therefore this probably couldn't happen. Well, wait a minute. Your experiences are limited, right? And so he gives the illustration of the prince who lacks experiences of freezing because in his climate, it's always warm. And so that prince cannot extrapolate with certainty from his non-experience of it, freezing. And so people in everyday situations cannot extrapolate from their non-experience of potential situations of special divine significance, such as miracle claims imply. Right. So the story is, you go to the prince in this moderate climate and you say, well, I think they were talking about, he gives it here. We didn't take the time to, people need to get the book and read it, right? Because there are things that we're leaving out here. But the story is that you confront the prince with folks who are riding, on water, or actually their horses on water. And it's because the water is frozen and they're able to do it. And he says, that can't happen. Right. I've never experienced anything like that, so it can't happen.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. Just because you haven't experienced it doesn't mean it can't happen, right? And that's the point he's trying to make here, right?
Yeah. One of the other ones I've also heard is showing people the kind of stair-step picture that we put in all our draft documents of these are where the stairs are, to people who have never seen stairs, never experienced it, and they just see this kind of shape on there, but they don't view it as like a stair shape. Where you hand it to a 5-year-old who's been told not to go down the stairs to the baby gates has always been there, and they go, oh no, that's a stair shape, and so they understand it in a different context because they've been inculcated into that culture that has stairs.
Right. And so the 5-year-old isn't smarter than the adult.
Right.
They just had different experiences, right? And they can make an analogy based on the picture and reality.
Yeah.
And so it says one cannot inductively prove a negative, by the way, without examining, notice, every possible instance. And so this problem becomes increasingly precarious as the sample size grows more limited. So we can't prove a negative. So you can't say that something, cannot happen, right? You can only say it hasn't happened at best, right? Or to your knowledge, it hasn't happened.
Right.
But you can't say it can't not happen, right? That's a, not only is that a double negative, that's trying to prove and claim a negative.
Yeah, I mean, put yourself into America in 1941, and you come across this guy with crazy hair who likes taking pictures with his tongue out, and he says, "Oh, I've taken these little tiny particles here, and I've created a bomb so big that they'll level two giant cities." And you just go, "Well, I know that can't happen because that little bit can't produce this big thing. That's just impossible. Dismiss it. It's not. It's outside the scope of my understanding of my a priori ideas." And so I know that, what was his name? Dr. Einstein here? Okay, some doctor is going to say that a little thing is going to produce a big explosion. We know that can't happen.
Get back to operating on people.
Yeah, wherever you're from. And so, so there our ideas have shift, because now we see, oh, there's a science behind it. There's people that working, but put people back before 1900 and take an account of people said, well, I put this piece of paper in a fire and I watched it float up. And so I created this balloon and I did the same thing and I went up. Well, no, if God intended man to have wings, then he would have to fly. He would given him wings. So
you can't ride on fire.
Yeah, exactly. So we know this isn't possible. So we just dismiss it out of hand, and we burn the person at the stake, and it never develops flight. And 50 years later, we're definitely not on the moon from there. So that's where we need to reevaluate some of our worldview there, the unexamined life, if you will.
There you go.